Hi again, and welcome to people that joined us now for the first panel of the 6th Public Sector Conference looking at cloud and data policies for public sector. As we promised you at the outset of the conference, the two panels that we will have today will be looking into greater detail at what are the architecture and the data sharing models that Europe should consider. And by the way, we also would like to highlight that these models could also be applicable in geographies outside Europe. And in fact, quite interesting again to have quite a few viewers from outside the region, which probably is a testimony that the Gaia-X model is driving quite some interest. So I would like to welcome on stage our stellar panel today. So I would like first to welcome Francesco Bonfiglio, the CEO of the Gaia-X Foundation. Thank you so much, Francesco, for being with us today.
Thanks, Irina, and hi, everybody.
We then have Rui Ribeiro, General Manager from IP Telecom. Welcome, Rui.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
Then we have János Mohácsi. So János, welcome first of all. János, you are the Chief International R&D Officer of the Infrastructure Division. So, and you're also the representative of Hungary for GÉANT and the European Open Science Cloud. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Good morning for everyone.
And last but not least, we have Xavier Poisson, the Vice President, Worldwide Service Providers Business and Cloud 28 Plus at HP. Welcome, Xavier.
Hi, Irina. Hi, everyone.
Excellent. So we promised an interactive discussion. So I have quite a few questions for you lined up, but we also encourage our audience to post them in their chat. So there are several themes that I would like to cover with you today. And I would start with a use case. Use case, so we know that the European data strategy identified nine industry verticals in which data spaces will be developed. Use cases on, public sector administration is one of the 9 verticals, and we wanted to kick off this panel with a concrete example of what is going on in the field. And so I would like to ask Rui, the CEO of IP Telecom in Portugal, if you could tell us what you are working on, and maybe you could start by explaining a little bit about your company so that people understand what is your operating model.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thanks for Europe, HPE, also for this invitation. Let me just introduce what is IP Telecom in order for everyone to understand the use cases that we are working to provide a future Gaia-X infrastructure in Portugal. So basically, IP Telecom is a telco and a cloud service provider, 100% state-owned, okay? And we were a day one member of Gaia-X, and today we are working with TIS, which is the representative and also the association of several enterprises where IP Telecom is it, and creating what is the Portuguese hub for Gaia-X. So saying this, also it is important to understand that IP Telecom is a company that is in a group where the public road and railway administration is managed. Okay, so our DNA is of course inside the public sector mainly. So in terms of work in our labs, what we are delivering is for now an infrastructure that we want to be Gaia X compliant for the market, not only for the public but also for the private sector. But in the meantime, we are working, of course, around these public sector areas and data spaces. Okay, what are we working? One of our goals is precisely to leverage our work in the mobility area, roads and railways, which means that all the infrastructure that we have provided in terms of data, traffic is an example, and today everyone, I would say, like applications like Waze, Google Maps, and Apple Maps, and other ones, they need to interact with several providers of roads and concessions, and according to also ITS directive, EU directive, so intelligent transport systems, there will be a single point of access where IP, which is our main company, will be that single point of contact for Portugal. So what we are, one first use case that we want to deliver is precisely to have this data space of traffic to be compliant around the Gaia X for the ecosystem to interact. Okay, this is our first goal. So today, what we are delivering is the infrastructure. Okay, and we are starting to create the future services for that. Okay. Additionally, just for details, just a little bit, and I wouldn't like to be long in this talk. We provide, for instance, also in the H2020 project, which has several countries, we provide the security of the with certifications, encryptions, and other things, the communications between infrastructure to vehicle communications. Okay, so what we do, and a simple use case for everyone to understand, is that we would be able, or we want to be able in the future, to provide, for instance, a Portuguese car or a French car that comes to Portugal, for instance, with Gaia X. The French data will be in France with the Gaia X concept, and our what we provide is the communication through a kind of roaming, a telco roaming between the data centers to provide the local, the Portuguese data and the French data, okay, to that vehicle. Okay, this is one use cases that we are working and leveraging also other projects that we have. So this is one mobility use case that we are trying to develop, and we are in conversations also with other public organizations and with the TIS, the other Gaia X member in Portugal, to provide other data spaces, because in Portugal, and not only in Portugal, the open data concept is quite important. So what we are doing and discussing with those entities, public entities, is precisely to create a kind of open data space compliant with Gaia X. Okay, that's what we are doing in the next few years, is where we will invest in terms of R&D in this area of Gaia X. Okay.
Great, thank you, Rui. And maybe Francesco, I'll come to you, because this is obviously one example of the data space for mobility. What do you see as other examples of data spaces in the public sector arena, especially because we talk a lot about the healthcare one, the automotive one, Catena X. Just curious, what is happening in the public sector sphere?
Well, to have a look at what is happening in the data space world of Gaia X, I think the first tip I could give is to go to our website. There is an interesting paper. It's called the DSBC, the Data Space Business Committee Positioning Paper. It's 180 pages with roughly 45 use cases spread across 9 different domains or data spaces, if you want. And this is the result of multiple Gaia X hubs working together hand in hand. And that's an example. So in that funnel of potential use cases, there is a pipeline of projects, and in that pipeline of projects, there is some concrete projects that have already started. Catena X is the one of the most spoken about, but believe me, is not the only one. And there is several ongoing. There is, for example, one in the energy space, another one in the healthcare, another one in the tourism, and another one in mobility again. But specifically on the public sector, let's say and I think I was saying it before we started the call. Every time I hear about public sector, I start a little bit smiling, because public sector is no more what we used to mean. Let's be honest. Public sector is the best representation of the concept of horizontal data spaces. In other words, nowadays the public administrations do not deal just with regulations and bureaucracy, but they have to orchestrate a set of services that will become more and more digitalized. So when we talk about healthcare, when we talk about mobility, when we talk about smart building, when we talk about smart infrastructure, smart roads, actually we are talking about public sector. And all these have been touched and are under development in the Gaia X working groups. But to be very concrete, I see that besides, let me say, the use case, the business use case of the public sector, which are more and more integrated with other private, public, or private only domains, like the ones I cited. You can imagine that even Catena X cannot live without taking into account the mobility, and the mobility is part of the public sector. But anyway, besides all this interaction that is growing, the public administrations are doing the very first thing. Primus vivere, the Latin used to say. So they have realized that in order to build any data space, you need to have a secure, whatever you mean by secure, or trusted digital platform where to put your data. And that's why Germany, France, Italy, and many countries are moving in the direction of building their trusted cloud. In Italy, we talk about Polo Strategico Nazionale, it's the Italian strategic cluster. In France, we talk about the Cloud Confiance, which is based on Secnum cloud rules. In Germany, trusted clouds, but all of them share the same vision. In other words, we have a first gap to overcome, which is the adoption of the cloud in order to make your data on the cloud. Nowadays, 80% of the data at the application are still legacy, not in the cloud, period. This is the first problem to be solved. Then we have a problem that is related with the GDPR and the digital market. The Data Governance Act is kind of solving it. There's some key interesting concepts introduced by the DGA, which is the usage of public data. So some rules to get access to public data. This will be paramount for the public administration, because there's a huge mine of gold under the public administration that cannot be simply exploited. The second concept is the data gratuity. And this is, I'm a big fan of this, because the GDPR introduced rules to say what you cannot do with my data, but not rules to say what I can do with my data. So the data gratuity will allow citizens to make their data available, to obtain something back. This is very ethical, and I think it's a great step ahead. We will see in the implementation of it. And a third thing introduced is let me say, a more concrete definition of how to anonymize data, because okay, we cannot use the data, but we should anonymize them. But if there is no clear rules, and I run the risk to infringe the GDPR and put at risk 4% of my revenues, this is a roadblocker for any innovation. So I think the Data Governance Act will overcome some limitations introduced by the GDPR. The sovereign cloud initiatives, let me say, by the different member states are buying into the very first need to bring the data on the cloud, whatever that is. GaiaX is building, let me say, a layer of governance and control, which is necessary, of course, because you can have all the technologies behind, but then you have to ensure that you can be safe, secure, in control, transparency, portability, etc. And then I see more and more a mesh up of all these data spaces, one another. You can think about healthcare. Everybody knows about the problem of healthcare. We couldn't be talking about Green Pass now if we wouldn't have mixed up public and private sector across different member states. This will grow more and more. Think about research. And you can imagine the vaccines would have not been what we have today without sharing search data. Is this public sector or private sector? Good question. Possibly people don't care. They just expect this to happen. And think about healthcare. There is no single hospital in Italy and possibly in Germany as well, but even worse, across countries that share the same medical record format. Is it a so complex technical problem to be solved? Not at all. But the first thing is to put the data on a platform. Second is to make them interoperable. Third is to establish common rules to exchange the data, and this is the data spaces. And last but not least, I would add, I know I'm a little bit disruptive, but I think we should overcome the historical separation between public and private, because the public administration administer the goods of the private people, and private people expect some value back. And I think they are expecting this mesh up of data spaces to grow more and more, and instead of continuing to be seen as a split thing. Otherwise, public administration will always be seen like a roadblock instead of a neighbor. And I think the future of PA is going to be the opposite.
Great, really a lot of stuff there. So to further unpack, so I do take the note that the first element is to put the data on the platform, and then the interoperability. And before we dig deeper, because I have quite a few questions on connectors of the data and really the infrastructure perspective, if I may just ask one still macroeconomic question to Xavier, on the potential of what you were just saying. So if we really move to a data economy and make sure that we are in a position to extract value from data, what would be the macroeconomic impact for Europe from this shift to a data economy where we really extract value from data?
Thank you, Irina, and good morning, everyone. So I need to come back to what digital transformation is, because I believe that it is underestimated. When we say that the value of a car today, it is 20% of their price, which is depending on the software and the data. This is already there. And when we say that in 30, it will be 60%. So when you will purchase a car in 30, 60% of the value of your car will be linked to software, data, and traffic of data. I believe we need to take that into consideration because it occurs everywhere. Healthcare, mobility, as was said, and so on. So there is a new kind of asset, very big economic asset, which is no more on the physical side, which is on the digital side. Now, one thing that I have not seen so much said about GaiaX, it is the impact of GaiaX, given this digital transformation, on the intra-trade of Europe. If you look at the intra-trade of Europe, which is a very, very big vector for the GDP, you can see that 68%, and it was 1 year ago, I believe, 68% of the trade in Europe is done intra-trade. It means that between the different countries, we exchange goods and services. And thanks to that, we can elevate the GDP across Europe. If you compare, for instance, with Latin America has a patchwork of countries. It is only 18% or 20%. If you look even at North America is in the 30%. So it means what? It means that we have a big strength working together in Europe, exchanging goods and services. So now, if a big part of what we are doing is becoming digital, there is a big risk for this intra-trade. Because if we let others capturing what is happening on the software data, exchange of data, by design, we can see our interest rate dropping perhaps by 5, by 10%, and in this case, it will impact dramatically the GDP and the employment. So I believe this is a threat, this is an opportunity, and I believe that Gaia-X is for that a fantastic avenue, because it is bringing back the capability for vertical industries, for small and medium business with large enterprises, to really capture the value of this data and to continue to create goods between and exchange goods between countries. And these goods and services will be physical and digital, but for the digital side, we will have the capability, thanks to phenomena such as Gaia-X, to really move forward. So I wanted to point this because this is something working from a global perspective. You know, looking at what is happening in Asia, for instance, they are between themselves at a 60% rate, a bit like us. And today, our strength, when you look at the global economics on the planet, one of the big strengths of Europe is this intra-trade in Europe. And I believe that moving forward, we need to capture the value of this Gaia-X initiative in order to strengthen what we are going to take out of this data economy.
Great, thank you, Xavier. So we hear data exchange is critical also for the GDP growth. But what is the status currently of our ability in Europe to exchange data? And maybe, János, I would bring you in. Obviously, you work with the European Open Science Cloud, and the whole point is offering to the scientific community access to data and services seamlessly. So I was just curious, based on your experience, if we take the scientific research and education community in Europe in particular, what is the current status of data exchange?
Thank you for the questions. I would still say that the currently the data exchange is supported quite well at a certain level. If you are looking how is it done, it is usually done in a federated way. So in every country, there is an organization called NRN who is responsible for serving the local organizations. And European-wide, there is another organization which is also a federated environment called GÉANT. And we have a very high-speed system there. It is providing for the researcher a high-speed, low-latency network with the state-of-the-art technologies up to terabit capacity. So I would say the capability is there, but unfortunately, the data generation is still a major issue. I can say a quite recent information. The new generation of the CERN facility that is doing particle physics experiments in Geneva is generating 47 terabit data per second. So and that kind of that amount of data should be processed and must be processed in several phases. So that amount of data should be first somehow select the important part, and then the important part should be stored and processed later in a cloud type of solution or maybe supercomputers. But in case of CERN, the situation it's a bit solved because the capacity is built around the CERN facility. Of course, the processing capacity is not enough. So CERN started to investigate the capacity of the new generation of computing industry, the quantum computing. But in the other hand, there are several quite distributed infrastructure like the square kilometer array or that is an astronomical observatory for radio telescopy, or some other systems which are collecting similar amount of data, and they are much more distributed. For example, there is an oceanography sensor network that is collecting information various places around the globe, and educational networking at GEONT and also the NRL level, we developed some kind of solution for that one called data transfer network, and some specialized transfer protocol that allows using the terabit capacity of the pipes. So I think we have to deal with the research facilities and connecting them properly, and then able to shift somehow the data from the data collection points to the processing points. Or other hand, it's also possible, and the advancement of the cloud facility, we can build edge type of computing much closer to the data sources. So I think that is the way forward, that we have to deal with the data lake, I would say, the data fountains.
That's great. Thank you, Janos. And maybe coming back, Francesco, to you, since obviously we talk about data federation and how can we make data interoperable. So currently, what we see, and although I clearly hear that you are suggesting that we should probably not look at data spaces in a vertical industry fashion, but still currently, at least the POCs we're seeing are pretty much, let's say, catalyzed around some vertical industries like automotive, healthcare, and so on. So my question really for you is, how will the data of these different data spaces talk to each other? Are you considering any connectors? Will the Eclipse Foundation play a role? Or what is your thinking? Anything you could share at this stage, I think would be very interesting for our audience. You're on mute.
Oops, can you hear me? Yeah. Let me correct, maybe I did not express myself correctly, but the question you posed earlier was about public sector. And when I said that we should not focus only on public sector as an individual, but as the mashup of different sectors, that's what I meant. Of course, we need to look at individual data spaces in the vertical space. They are as important as the mashup of them into new horizontal data spaces. This is the first clarification, because it is important. The second, I wanted to make a couple of points, because I think it's if we want to make this discussion more interactive. First of all, I wanted to pick up on Xavier and thanking him, because I always open my pitch talking about the value of the explanation of what data economy means. And I am more conservative. What I say is that nowadays we own as Europe 4 to 5% of the direct data economy. If you think about that, in 2025, this is going to be 850 billions, is going to be roughly 9% point of the GDP. If you add on top of that the added value produced on any product by data, I say that it's going to be 30, 40%. But this intra-trade concept is very interesting. And actually, this is the recipe for the solution. In other words, we don't need to invest more. We don't need to spend more. We need to revert the cash flow back from outside into the boundaries of Europe. That's a very important concept that I keep preaching. So thank you, Xavier, for making it that clear. Going back to Janos, I think that Janos was referring to some very specific world, which is that of scientific data, where, for God's sake, the free circulation of data is a, let me say, a desire of everybody. So, scientists in every field, they want to get access to data. They want to share data, because this is the basis of the research. Let me be honest, this is not exactly the case in every other sector. Actually, it is the opposite. In the industrial sectors, the main problem is that most of the data is still owned under the desk, or even worse, is stored somewhere where nobody has a clue of where this is and what it can be used for. So this is to say that before getting to the problem of data interoperability, which is the real problem, we first in GaiaX are trying to build this concept of federated cloud, which is the future, because clouds are distributed. So, sorry, data are distributed, so cloud must be federated to follow the data, let me say. Second, we are implementing components to enable the verification of the characteristics of the service. So every service provider will have to publish its service descriptor according to a common format that allows the GaiaX technology architecture to inspect the service, verify its characteristics, also in terms of levels of interoperability, and publish this service into an immutable, incorruptible register where everybody has access to. And this is another important step. Before using a service, you need to trust that service. Then we can talk about interoperability, and there's different levels of interoperability. First of all, if you want to interoperate data, you need to have either, let me say, common ontologies and common data formats, and or you have to adopt new paradigms like the compute to data that allow you to bring the compute towards the data without moving the data. And this is going to be another important step, because the more the data grow in a distributed, dispersed way, the less you will be capable to bring them into a data lake or a data ocean. So we are implementing all these concepts into the software components of GaiaX. So this is why I wanted to make these punctual distinctions. Of course, when it gets to data connector, this is part of the project. Of course, we are collaborating a lot with IDSA, International Data Space Association, who developed the IDSA connector, which is well known. And of course, we will be using it, but also we are open to any other implementations that we are evaluating. The important thing is that all these components will enable the creation of these interoperability, transparency, portability, sovereignty, etc., in a way that can be inspected. So we would not force everybody to use an IDSA connector. They might want to use a Microsoft connector, an Eclipse connector, or whatever other type of connector, but the level, let me say, of certification of that connector will be transparent and will be inspectable and will be published. And this is what we will make possible. So in other words, we want to make possible the people and the users of technology to make educated decisions. We don't want to force anyone to have the data in France, in Italy, in Germany, use one component or another, one technology or another. But we want to make the people capable to make educated decisions. In order to do that, you need to be transparent as much as possible. How much technology player will be willing to be inspectable, how much they will be willing to be controllable, configurable. This is part of this. Let me say, this is the other part of the game. We are doing this part of the game. We are setting the rules. We are implementing mechanisms that verify the rules, and everybody will be free to play the game.
Great. Thank you, Francesco. And I think your point on enabling stakeholders and players to make educated decisions is a really interesting one, instead of mandating one option or modality of connected to really allow people to choose. But Janos, I believe you had a question for Francesco.
It's more a comment for Francesco. I think we have similar issues also at the research environment. I think it has to be a mental change also for the researchers. Researchers doing the research, they are collecting data, producing data. They are considering that that's their own data. What is important when the open science idea manifested was to change such a mentality and make the data kind of fair data. That means findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. That's the acronym of the FAIR. So I think it's important to able to understand what's happening in the research field. Probably you don't have to open the data, but if you have to specify what kind of data you have, and you should be able to interact with the data, at least at the meta level. So that's quite important for from the perspective of the research. So I think also for EOSC, we are very much aligned with the data management part, and therefore one of the major architectural component also for the EOSC service model is to provide such a and authorization infrastructure for and not only infrastructure but a service component for the exchange of the data, but also on top of it several levels of interoperability, as you mentioned, Francesco. So I think we have a similar technology, similar thinking. In EOSC, we think that there is a technical interoperability. That's where the data can be exchanged. Then we have the semantic interoperability, and top of it, organizational interoperability, and then legal interoperability. So that's the different levels we try to structurize and exchange the necessary information to able to use the data properly and not misunderstand the content. So it's quite important also to keep the data as clean as possible and as the metadata part as accessible as possible. Thank you.
I agree, and the FAIR approach is exactly the basis of our labeling framework. And I'm talking to Karel and the OSCOG Association. We are doing a lot of work together. I think we will create something together.
Yes, I am aware that you have a regular discussion time to time, and you are exchanging ideas, and also, as you mentioned, the interoperability. In our interoperability framework, we are thinking of also interoperability with the Gaia-X, and also benefiting of the capacity and capability of the Gaia-X and not reinventing the wheel, although some research disciplines has their own solution that has to be somehow adopted, because EOSC, it's a bit different because it's a top-down solution, not a big initiative, but they want to somehow federate the existing data infrastructures and research infrastructures, and also electronic research infrastructures together to have a common infrastructure for the researchers. Thank you.
That's great to hear about also the interactions between the European Open Science Cloud and the Gaia-X Federation. So I think there is a lot of agreement on the advantages of Gaia-X and the model for the economy. But are there any challenges? And maybe I would come, Rui, to you too. So obviously you are a day one member, you're a believer, you're running a proof of concept in mobility. What is your perspective? Are there any challenges we need to overcome collectively as an ecosystem to make Gaia-X deployment a success?
Yes, I think, well, there are a lot of challenges, not only technological, but I would pick up one that I think, at least for me as a member, it's not yet fully clear, which is, and Xavier and Francesco already spoke about the economy, is precisely what is the business models that can be delivered or leveraged across Gaia-X, okay? Meaning that companies and service providers or data providers, they need also to understand and what will be the possibilities to create the data sustainability for the open data concept and other things. Okay, as a public company or a state-owned company, we need to understand, and we as a cloud service provider, we need to understand that we are investing in terms of infrastructure, in terms of technology. We of course we have the government that that intends to leverage the data for the economy, like it was explained, but the private sector that also has some data and some other data, they need also to understand how can they get their business models around it. Okay, so I see at this moment Gaia X as a kind of a technological infrastructure, which is quite important, that needs to help the ecosystem to leverage business models, okay? Because these are the business models that will be able to create competition, to create new companies, to create new models, new opportunities. Okay, so and typically, as I used to say, is there is no technological project without some business case. Okay, we are speaking on use cases and so on, but there are some points, cloud service providers, software houses, and other things that they need to understand how can they invest and get their money back, basically. So the economy needs to work, and this for me at this moment it's one of biggest challenge because we need to understand that Europe and Gaia X I see as a path to try to I would say to defend Europe on its data against the US and Asian Chinese companies. Okay, so we are working to provide data inside Europe. We need to understand how can we compete with US and other companies. The difference is that we are creating a federated, a kind of federation of data, but Microsoft, Google, AWS, Alibaba, and other ones, they are companies that work independently and not, so they have a track and a strategy for their own. In Europe, we are working, we don't have this kind of companies, so we are working as a cooperation field. We need to go fast on that and on this business model in order for this economy and for European companies to be stronger against these outside competitors. So business models, it's I think it's one of the things that we need to clarify and to discuss more, at least from my point of view. Okay.
Thank you, Rui. So I guess the question
just,
is...
Sorry, just to say, the technology it's not the problem. Okay.
Great. So I guess indeed the question is, so what is the business model and what are the sustainable revenue streams over time if you publish your services that will run then in this federated ecosystem? I don't know, Francesco, if you want to comment, or I know Janos had some experience from his field. Up to you guys who wants to go first.
Yes, I think I have to go first. First of all, there is no business model without business. Sorry for the provocation, but we need to be aware of that. What we are talking about here is the risk to run out of business, and the subject is Europe, not in 30 years, but in 5 years. So if the numbers that myself or Xavier mentioned resonate, this is the risk. So we are talking about finding ourselves hostage of proprietary technology provided by independent market players in less than 5 years. Now, let me make a parallel. If BMW, Daimler, Volkswagen, Stellantis, they all dependent on engines coming from one single player in Japan or in India, I have no doubt the European Commission and all the member states would make urgent actions to prevent that. Now, we have to be aware that actually what we are buying from a few players is not just the engine. It's the engine, the wheels, and everything of our car. So first of all, the reason to be part of Gaia X is to be aware that this is possibly the last chance to create a leveling of the play field, to create an alternative for Europe, but last but not less important, to preserve the market of technology of European players. You can imagine that if we are not doing something now, possibly 80% of our technology players, which is not just system integrators, which may use one or another technology irrespectively, but also technology providers, cloud service providers, and we don't have just small ones. We have, large ones. We can have, OVH, Ionos, Aruba in Italy, etc. They will become resellers of licenses of other technologies. But this is not even worse. Even worse is that our sons will study certification of commercial products at university. They will not study how to develop new software. Let's be aware. I don't want to be threatening anybody, but this is the scenario. Now, how can we make the difference? Like we said before, we need to create an alternative, a European alternative to these large models that are A, no more suitable with the world of data, which is distributed. So we need a federated model. B, are proprietary, so not interoperable by design. So we can even have regional implementation of hyperscaler technology through the licensing mechanism and double encryption key. Nonetheless, they will remain local lock-in technologies. So if the IT market does not understand that, there is no reason to join Gaia X. If the IT market understand that this is a risk, we need to roll up sleeves and do something. What we are doing, business model, is the following. If we can create a network of players, which can be providers of technology, federating each other to build larger regions, with broader number of zones, with broader services, that can compete with the critical mass of the few larger providers we have today, we have an alternative. How do you do that? The hyperscalers cannot do that because they will not cooperate each other. They will try to become bigger in local. But the small, medium ones, which is 90% of our economy fabric in Europe, can do that. But in order to do that, they need a kind of operating system. This is what Gaia X is building. So to interconnect different nodes. Another thing to make a business is to ensure that you do not sell out your data. In other words, you retain your data because the data is the raw material to build your digital products. So if you want to build a digital car, the value of that, the digital value on top of that car will be built on the data that car produces, the roads where the car travels produce, the people on board produce. Now, all those data can become part of a, European infrastructure that is protected, that is safe, etc. And therefore, we retain the value of all the services that produce that digital platform, all the services that manage those data, and all the services built on top of those products by the company that owns the data. In other words, like I said at the beginning, I think Xavier was talking about this, we need to implement this intra-trade market for data. And the only way to do that is build a physical alternative to the physical oligopolist we have today. In other words, I think the business case is 100% of the IT economy. and possibly 50% of the non-IT economy. And I don't know how to represent that in a more concrete way, but to be honest, this is what I truly believe.
But Francesco, just to add on that, because I believe it is very important for service providers because they are putting their money on the table today in order to serve the purpose. What I want to tell to Rui is that what has changed in the past 2 years, thanks to GaiaX, it is that the vertical industries, meaning the top industries in Europe, have decided to think about data spaces. And when you look at what is happening in aerospace, in agriculture, in finance, everywhere, in what you said, mobility, the large enterprises and the local government are putting money to design what are the data spaces. So this has been very leapfrog because it was not, a real topic. And now they have spent quite everywhere in Europe, nearly 12 months, 18 months, working together in the national hubs, in the data space organizations around GaiaX to specify what needs to be done in order to extract the value of data. So these guys are ready to purchase now the delivery of that because there is a theoretical model that has been built, and now it needs to be implemented. What you as a service providers is doing is really fantastic because you decided to grab the opportunity and to say, okay, let's imagine that Air France wants to do that. How much it will cost to Air France only to build this kind of data space, distributed data space management IT system? It will cost a fortune because we speak about a lot of money. And Janos was speaking about high performance computing, and we have the same with AI, machine learning, and so on, IoT management, and so on, which is the overlays of what will happen on the services. It costs a lot of money in investment. The good news is that if you, IP Telecom, in Portugal, are able to model, as we are doing it together, the principles of building distributed data space for a vertical industry, people will jump on the opportunity. Why? Because if each of them wants to build it alone, it will cost too much money. They will never be able to do it. If they are able to subscribe to you, to your expertise, data space as a service, in this case, it will be affordable. And this is the reason why, we believe in the big role of the service providers across Europe to just jump on the opportunity and to replicate. Because, and you know that very well, we have discussed that, what we are doing with you is a standard architecture that we have done. And this standard architecture, we know that it needs to be open enough in order that when Francesco will come with his identity management rules on software, these federation services rules on software, it should work. And this is a commitment that we bring on the table that we will make it happen. Now, what is happening is, what you are doing, we see that in the healthcare industry, Liguria Digitale, in Italy, we are replicating the same architecture. When we discuss with Plus Server in Germany, we are putting the same architecture. And coming back to Janos, you would be surprised to know that we are working with the CSC Lumi, as Gilles was speaking at the beginning of this conversation, just to design how researchers in hospitals can securely, based on the right protocols, being able to send information to a supercomputer, have processes and applications work there, and complying to the rules of GaiaX and identity management, being able to take the outcome, but only the outcome which is needed for them as a researcher. So, net, what I want to state here is that, yes, this is a journey. I believe that we do not realize how much has been done during the past 2-3 years. Can tell you, being in the working groups and on the field with you, Rui, with some others, just looking at the use cases on how the end users are really designing their data spaces, we are leapfrogging. And what I can tell you is that if you compare with the US, for instance, we are far in advance on the use cases because I don't see this kind of thing. And from these use cases, large enterprises have understood they can derive value, and now the purpose for them is how I execute it. And to execute it, they need service providers to propel it as a service. And this is the reason why you are there. And this is the reason why we are very happy to support everyone to make the journey. I'm sorry, I've been a bit long.
That's perfect, Xavier. Rui, did you want to comment?
Yeah, so I start with Xavier. So what you are saying is completely correct. Basically, it's not the technology the problem. The architecture is the same around Europe. It's what you do with that technology. That's the point. But with you and again with the case that or the explanation that Xavi and that Francesco has done, what needs to be clear is the value chain where each company in this distribution, in this technology area, in this component development, integrators, and so on, I would say this new value chain that needs to be clear for the market. Okay, in order for each company to understand what is its role. And another thing that is important, and I think Gaia Hex has an important role on what I will say is precisely to push these standards, I would say, these Europe standards in the public sector, in the government, okay? Because like you said, to the other hyper clouds and hyper software houses or software companies, they today control data in all the governments, okay? From I would say word online, emails, and other things. So these kind of things, it's not managed in Europe. And like you said, perhaps in 5 years, these kind of things or these kind of companies can say, well, the prices go up, the data is in my data center, now you have this kind of thing. So it's a kind of sovereignty of Europe that is in this challenge, okay? And of course, you said also, and you are completely correct, 90% of the companies are small and medium here in Europe. And even the bigger ones can, in fact, disappear. I see here some, for instance, in this market of cloud service providers, I see several movements of companies here that were cloud service providers or housing or mini data centers and so on, that they are disappearing to be integrators of hyperclouds. Okay, so that's the case. So I think GaiaX has several challenges to push this European market, and it's quite important for the existence of technology in Europe. Okay.
But anyway, you're right, Rui. We are developing a lot of documentation to detail this storytelling, because there is so many different reasons why we should do what we are doing, that it's not so easy. It's not just black and white. It requires a lot. So we are developing documents to explain all this. Thank you for the question, because it's absolutely great.
Sorry to interrupt you. I'm used to also to say it's easy to say, it's hard to do. Okay, that's the case. But we need to do, and with errors and learning from it. Okay.
Yeah, dude.
And fast.
The only one that don't make mistakes are those that do nothing. This is what we used to say.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Great, guys. I just wanted to maybe move on to a question that we received from the audience, because I did promise that we will take them. So we have a question from Lindsay Hendricks, and she's really asking a question to the entire panel. Based on your own experience within Hungary, Portugal, and the rest of Europe, do you have a wish list for what you'd like policymakers at European level to do to support the delivery of modernization of public sector services so that it is done in a sustainable and climate-friendly manner. So this question, and thank you, Lindsay, goes back to the topic that we tackled a lot in the first part of the conference, really public sector modernization as driver of change, and how can this on top be done in a sustainable manner? Anyone has any thoughts?
Maybe I have some. I would say it's a rather traditional answer for these challenges. I think one of the most important element here is the openness and the transparency. So I think the public sector should be more transparent in a sense that the citizen can see what's going on and why they are doing certain things. So that's quite important, and making the development and the changes visible. So that's probably not a policy making, but it's kind of attitude of the sector. But for the more climate friendly changes, I think what is important, I think, is to try to select the green solution and doing that via assessing the carbon dioxide footprint of the certain solution, and doing some kind of work to somehow reduce this CO2 footprint via automation, using less paper, and not to ask the citizens to submit the data that you already have. That's still a case in plenty of cases. So I think that can somehow make also the processing of the problem and providing solution much more fluently than collecting and processing the data again and again, without using the existing information we have already, because we have plenty of data at the public administration. And part of the openness, I think, quite important to use slightly more open source solution. So I think that can also somehow influence our way of thinking of using such a tools, and also not only the open source, but interoperable, standardized solution, in order to able to replace certain elements that is not sustainable anymore with a newly emerged solution. And what's more, to develop something with discussion with the real users. So selecting the real stakeholders of the development. That's quite important, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, János. We have 6 minutes left, so I will take a final question that we got from the audience, and this is for you, Francesco, from Denis Stanarevic. I quote, data EU intra-trade is of course based on trust and identity management. It is not a question how to establish it from the technology perspective. So what is your advice on how to break barriers in communication with participants and entities which could take benefit? So it's really on identity management.
Yes, of course. Intra-trade is all about trust, and that's what GaiaX is doing. GaiaX is building a layer of digital trust. So when I talk about transparency, sovereignty, and interoperability, I'm talking about building something that nowadays is not available in the existing cloud stacks. And when I talk about, let me say, enabling the fabric of the small medium business, if you want, not because they are small, but definitely we don't have any single giant in Europe as big as the other giants we are using nowadays. But enabling them to federate and to create the critical mass that we miss, providing the added value of the trust, not based on certification authority, not based on the GaiaX ASBL, not based on any individual, but based on technology, decentralized architecture that provides trust by definition. This is what we are implementing, developing in software in GaiaX. This is why possibly, and I want to be a little bit less politically correct here, but you see a lot of movement in the recent 4 months that has never happened before by the large hyperscalers. Why they are moving so fast, proposing they can change their architecture, they can implement anything in region, they can provide the licenses. I don't know you, I've been in the business for 30 years. I have never, ever seen something like this in my life, ever. So possibly we are doing the right thing. Yes, we are late. Yes, it is complex. Yes, we are cumbersome, we're European. But this is exactly what we are doing. We are building a technology layer to make digital trust tangible. When this is done, it will be just a matter of the market players of Europe to decide whether they want to jump on board or stay beside and see what happens. There is 2 options. We are providing an alternative for free. It is very expensive to do it by yourself. If you are a small, medium company, you can have the chance to make your services GAIA-X compliant and make them valuable much faster than possibly someone that has more interest to protect. I can continue, but like I said, we are writing a document to express all these values. But this is exactly what we are doing to enable this intra-trade market that Xavier was talking about.
Amazing. And this is also a great transition to the next panel, because as you said, now this is an opportunity for small and medium enterprises to scale. And in fact, while we wrap up this panel, I'll just flag that in the next one, we'll have Pierre O'Donoghue from the Commission, looking after future networks and a European cloud service provider, precisely to see their perspective on how they can leverage the GAIA-X vision. So we heard a lot of very inspiring thoughts. So we first need to go to bring data onto a platform. Secondly, we need to build trust. Thirdly, we need to make this data interoperable. So this is really the way, if I am summarizing hopefully correctly, Francesco, of the path forward. I think this was incredibly interesting also because you guys went into quite some detail. So also very helpful because we have a lot of indeed small and medium enterprises joining us today. So really huge thank you to all for all the insights. And I wish you all success, and Francesco, obviously a lot of success in your mission in building an alternative for Europe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.